Welcome to the No Plateau podcast for stroke and brain injury survivors, their caregivers, and the therapists helping them to break boundaries in their recovery journey. Hosted by Henry Hoffman, a certified occupational and clinical therapist, and Pete Durand, a certified podcast host, CPH. Look it up. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the No Plateau podcast. I'm one half of your hosting duo, Pete Durand, along with Henry Hoffman. Henry, well, good to see you again today.
Hey, Pete, how are you?
Doing great. We've got some special guests on the program, kind of heroes from our perspective in the stroke survivor world. Jane and Guy Harvey are on the program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
Welcome.
So we're going to have Guy kind of explain why we're here, and I think we have to give credit to Jane why we're still here. Would be the way I would describe it. Right?
Yes.
And Henry has had a long-standing relationship with Guy, and we'll drill into why this is all so important. I'll set the stage. So Guy is a two-time stroke survivor, but unusually they happen 30 days apart from here, within 30 days, I think, correct?
Yes.
Very, very quickly.
In March of 2016, I had a construction company and I cut my hand. And I just bandaged it and went on about my work. And every day it would break open and bleed, and I would bandage it again and go on day by day. That went on for that was in March. By May the 2nd, I felt sick and went blind and basically told Jane, I can't see you. What happened was that a blood infection had taken over my body and went to my heart and destroyed my heart and caused a stroke. First stroke.
So it was 2 months that infection had a chance to get a hold of your body.
Well, it was the last part of March, and the last week of March, and by the time the first part of May. Yeah, about 5 to 6 weeks.
So the first lesson for all of our listeners is maybe a little Neosporin and a Band-Aid and go see a doctor when you cut yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
The biggest problem was that in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with a heart valve problem, heart murmur. And that's where the infection set in. So I'm not sure I would even had the problem when that didn't happen. So.
Okay, so you had a pre-existing condition that allowed that infection to take hold, which is, again, this kind of buildup of events that led to the stroke. So you said to Jane, I can't see you. What happens next?
You want to take it from here?
Sure. I said, well, this isn't good. So let's get in the car and go to the hospital. And he's like, no, I'm good. And we have this service up here in Canada called telehealth. So I said, let's call telehealth. And you speak to a medical professional. And they said, okay, you do need to go to the hospital. I said, okay, I'll call 911. They had already called 911 for me. And as the ambulance had arrived, the guy started to slur his words. So he was just starting to have the symptoms, other than going blind, of a stroke.
So we get to the hospital. I had my first stroke. They realized I had a blood infection. So then they start trying to find something to battle the blood infection. That took about a week. And then they realized that my heart was really infected. They didn't know how bad, but when the guy opened me up, he said, if you were older, I would have just closed you up and called it a day. You were infected to the core. He said, when I was stitching your heart, he said, the thread would pull through the meat of the heart. He said, when I couldn't stitch anymore, I started to glue. Wow. I said, he put thousands of stitches in my heart.
1,000.
Thousands, he said.
So your whole experience, Guy, it's an amazing, it's a near-death experience for sure. And it's, I hear various stories about how individuals have suffered a stroke, and you're at the top of the list regarding entertaining for sure. But we're glad you're here. I know Jane has been a wonderful wife caregiver for you as well. If I can switch gears for a little bit and talk about your rehab stint. I've had for 25 years stories where the critical inpatient time went smoothly, perfectly. The doctors were great. The therapists were great. The team focused on trying to get that arm and hand back. And then I hear stories where it went all horrifically wrong, or the health professionals' primary focus was to get you out of the hospital as quick as possible, independent one-handed, and teaching a lot of compensatory techniques to get you independent one-handed. And as you've learned over the years, guys, that critical window, those first couple months, man, that's when you really want to feed that brain, right? Bombard the brain with stimulation. So that's my biggest gripe, right? My biggest gripe is if you ask 10 stroke survivors who just had a stroke, what would you rather do? Would you rather focus on improving your independence one-handed with your healthy arm, or would you like to try to get your arm and hand back? Of course, they would all say get the arm and hand back. Yet we don't do that because of the healthcare system. That's my clarion call for a crusade to beat learn non-use and fight learn non-use. And that's something I'm writing up right now for another blog post. Let's hear your story, Guy. Did things go right early on in the inpatient rehab stay? Did you have a good experience, or was it an experience you wish you could, reset and do over?
Well, the big thing for me, they asked me when I came in, what do you want? And I said, man, I want to walk. So they sat in and showed me the science of walking. Now, I didn't think was there such thing, but there is. And they would run through the fundamentals of it and practice that every day.
Posture.
Posture was big. So they focused on what I wanted. My hand, my arm was secondary, I'll be honest with you. It took 3 nurses to get me out of bed in the mornings.
Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of stroke survivors, the very first thing they want to do is walk out of there, right? And then when they get home, they realize the struggle of not having a hand. Then they say,
Absolutely.
"Gee, we should really start focusing on the hand." And sometimes it's a little too late. But I know walking seems to be, and it makes sense. You want to be able to walk out of the hospital versus in a wheelchair. So walking seems to be something of a top priority, followed by hand and arm.
Absolutely. It was for me anyway.
Well, they really, even when he was in rehab, they really, I think, they asked him what he wanted, but I don't think they ever thought he was going to get there. I mean, he was pretty, they kept saying, you were pretty low when you came in on this scale. I can't remember the name of the scale, but you're pretty low. You probably are going to be in a chair for the rest of your life.
That's got to be hard to hear, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are lots of tears, let me tell you. He's pretty determined.
No, it's stubborn. Now, when I went in, I measured 5 on the stroke assessment scale. I'm not sure what that scale is. And when I left, I was a 35. And I far surpassed anything they ever thought I'd get.
That's a big jump. That's a big jump, Guy. So as we transition the story from inpatient rehab and you are being discharged to your next phase of recovery, a lot of online and support resources are given to families and stroke survivors. My favorites are to teach the clients how to look up research, going to PubMed and typing in specific treatment interventions and understanding research, going to sites that go over what's considered evidence-based and what's considered hogwash, and making sure they know the difference between junk science and actual evidence-based practice. There's a lot of listeners today that are stroke survivors as well as family members. What are some of your top resources that you've learned, Jane and Guy, since going from inpatient to home to outpatient, that you think some other stroke survivors can benefit from? Do you have a few that you definitely recommend as far as getting educated?
Well, the one site that I happened upon, and this was even before he was in rehab, is how do you help somebody recover a hand or a movement or whatever, arm movement after a stroke. And I came upon the SABLE website, and it was like the great exercises, and I saw some the SABLE stretch and all the other things, and I was like, I don't know this company. And as you say, you can get caught up in stuff that isn't real. So it was like, okay, I backed off, but I took some of the information there, and I would try to help Guy when he wasn't getting any rehab, when he was just recovering. He wasn't getting any rehab. I would help him with exercises and stuff to help one, to keep his hand moving. It was starting to get in a clench fist and up like this, and I'm like, to me that wasn't natural. So okay, I got to stretch this. It was getting tight, and I didn't know anything about spasticity. I knew nothing.
So if I may interrupt at this point, Jane, this is the sad story of what happens all the time. Did you sign up to become a stroke clinician, Jane? 10 years ago,
I
15 years ago?
No, no,
You,
not at all.
you never wanted to be a stroke expert, but why are you the one doing all the research, right? Why isn't this not provided to you somewhere along this journey? Shouldn't you be getting an orientation packet at least at bare minimum? I mean, if we go buy a pool, if we go buy a grill, if we're going to get anything in life, we get the orientation packet, which gives us all the resources we need and the expectations. But why, when it comes to life-threatening medical issues, are you on Google as your number one source? Sadly, that's the case for
Yeah.
most, and that's got to be frustrating. And and Guy, did you, after you left inpatient, did you go right into home care, skilled nursing setting, or to outpatient therapy? What was your next stop on your road?
When I left the inpatient, I came out and went to the outpatient probably a month later.
It was maybe 3 weeks later, wasn't it?
About 3 weeks to a month later, I went to outpatient for probably about 3 months.
And then why did you stop after 3 months?
Because
That's all they. That's all they. I wanted to hide the Easter eggs. They said, "Well, how long do you want to stay?" I said, "I'll hide the Easter eggs."
He wanted to stay as
Yeah.
long as he could, but
That's all they've given
there's
me.
a finite amount of time that they will allow, because I guess there's other patients they have to make room for. But he was still in the wheelchair at that point, and he ended up walking out and pretty much only used a wheelchair in very crowded situations after that. But they also took the time now to work on his hand and therapy with that
Yeah.
as well.
Mm.
The one thing that they did say to him was, the inpatient rehab that you went to did a great job. You have fantastic posture, which makes walking easier, made their job easier to get him to where he needed to be.
Right, right.
That's a blessing that the inpatient care, which is, Henry, you recognized early, that early care was so good. That's fantastic. Jane, I think there's something you had mentioned in another discussion. When you noticed that Guy clearly had a good side and a bad side, you made it a point to sit on the bad side
Yes.
when you sat with him. Tell us more about that.
Well, he had left side neglect, so he wasn't seeing anything on the left hand side. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, it was just intuitive. It was just something out of instinct. I'm going to sit on the left side. Why make it easy? He's just never going to notice this side. So I'm going to make him work to look at me. I'm going to make him work when we're having conversations. I use sticky notes on the left side, and I would ask him to look for, numbers. Can you find the numbers on the wall in order, right? And they were all mixed up and all over that wall. Just to try to make that, from the Google research I did, you have to try to make those connections. And they're not going to happen on their own. You have to kind of give them a reason to. And so the whole strategy was give him a reason to look for something. Or when he would just, instead of making life easy, people make a mistake. When you come home, like, where's the ketchup? And it's right in front of you. You might hand it to him. So, well, it's on the table in front of you. No, it's not. Yes, look for it. Move your eyes from side, not your head, your eyes from side to get that connection going. And repeat yourself what you're looking for, because he would forget too. And that's kind of how he would look for things. Or when we would be driving, I say, okay, I see a sign and it's, or I would see something. Can you tell me when you see it?
We would play the I Spy game.
I Spy?
Yeah.
Well, Carly Russo is our producer. She's sitting in this call. Carly, let's make sure we note that last 3 or 4 minutes from Jane there. And it goes back to what Henry was describing, right? All of a sudden, Jane's got to be the expert. But Jane's instincts were really spot on. Everyone needs a Jane, right? I don't know, a lot of people get a Jane.
I married up.
So you married way up, Guy. No question you got a Jane. But Henry can talk about all of the accurate, clinically backed research things you just did there instinctively, Jane. But that's a clip we want to share with our public following, because it's just such common sense. And post-stroke therapy is a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's truly a team effort, and you described it really well.
Well, it doesn't just happen within the therapy sessions. It's every waking moment, especially at the beginning, is therapy. It's like, oh, you're having trouble with this. How can I figure out a way to, help you with that trouble, that you're making those accomplishments. I could do everything for you, but then I'm going to be doing everything for you forever. And that's not who he
Right.
wanted to be. That's not who he wanted to be.
Jane, you're addicting. It reminds me of Jane's Addiction from the 90s. A whole new meaning, Jane. You know,
Way up, way up.
yeah, on a lighter note, a lot of times I'll talk to stroke survivors and it'll always be something that's changed about them. And Guy, I'm going to ask you that as well about what has changed. What's funny is I had a spouse of one stroke survivor tell me, I've had a blessing happen when my husband had a stroke. And I'm like, really? And she went on to say that prior to the stroke, he was a grumpy, cantankerous individual. And ever since his stroke, he's loving, supportive, kind. I love the new stroke husband. So I've never heard that before, and I thought that was pretty hilarious. Guy, what has changed for you the most since your stroke?
Well, the thing for me, I think we only met 5 months before this, so we were just getting to know each other. In reality, I mean, when I came into heart surgery, I asked her to marry me. So
Say that one more time. Say that one more time for the audience.
yeah, yeah. I met her on January the 2nd, had my stroke on May the 2nd. After I committed heart surgery, after a 9-hour surgery, the first person I seen was her. I asked her to marry me.
That
And in
is
my
amazing.
mind,
That's like,
I'm thinking, oh, well, he's on drugs, so we'll just, smile and wave, and we'll never mention this again.
She said nothing.
And Jane, do you want to just describe what he looked like at that point in
Oh,
time? He was
No.
kind of curled up in the fetal position, right?
Yeah.
It's just how you wrote it up, right, Guy? It's just how you planned it.
Same thing. Well, when I left the hospital there, they sent me to continuing care to wait for long-term care. So she was away on business in Montreal, and I called her when she got off the airplane and said, "Listen, I want to see you." And the nurses had set up in our room a little room set up, and I asked her to marry me while I was in continuing care.
Again. So this is with a feeding tube and a craniotomy, divot in his head, 135 pounds, in a wheelchair, tilted back because he had no strength to hold himself up.
wow.
Yep.
Who would have
So I
thought,
asked
Guy,
her,
were you thinking that years ago that this was your special moment? This is how you're going to do it?
"Oh, this is how I was going to do it, dude." No, we done that, and she said to me, "I will marry you when you can dance with me." I said, "Man, I can hardly stand." Actually, I couldn't.
Well, Jane, you're a natural born therapist. That's what you are. You're a natural born therapist. I mean, you can hear it from the strategies you've discussed earlier with Guy and neglect and how you're driving him internally. But caregivers shoulder a lot of the work, and and their health is important too. What are some of the tips, strategies for folks that are listening? Just had a family member who suffered a stroke. What are some of the things the tidbits you could share, the little golden nuggets that you wish you knew right when you were going through this experience with Guy?
Being strong enough to be able to say, okay, I need some time for me. When Guy came out of inpatient rehab, there's a service through the March of Dimes here, and so he gets a service in the morning for an hour that helps him with his his morning routine, and so I don't have to do it. Then during the day we have March of Dimes come, and it was like not really what they could do for him so much as what they could do for me. And that's how they described it. What haven't you been doing for yourself? Because now you have somebody else to look after. And that's why they're here, right? So they do what I need them to do. Plus they help Guy with stuff so that I can work, right?
We've all been in that situation where we had a loved one who either had cancer, in your case, stroke, and the husband, the spouse, the child, they become the caregiver, and it's exhausting. It's hard. They need to be equally treated in their own little way. And so it's something that gets looked over due to guilt a lot of times, where, you feel like you shouldn't be the one receiving this type of special treatment. And I think there's a stigma behind that, right?
Right. But we also think, oh, I don't need that, right? It's like, oh, it's just another person come. It's overwhelming when you come out of the hospital and You have people contacting you and it's like, what are they calling me about? Like, I had to have a book to keep track of everything that was going on because it was overwhelming, right? The amount of doctor's appointments, but they're not just one doctor. There's many different, because we have the heart doctor, neurologist, family doctor. I mean, and so that was so overwhelming. And then you have somebody calling saying, "Yeah, I want to come and talk to you about a service," and I'm like, I don't want another person in my house. I don't need another responsibility, something to keep track of. But eventually, all that, over time, it goes away. You get a handle on it, and you do need what you think you don't want, if that makes any sense.
Yep. Yep. So looking back, Jane, Guy, you've had your journey. You've made a lot of decisions along the way. Is there anything you would do differently from the hospital to home to outpatient to where you are now that you wish you would have, if you only knew, you'd have probably have tried something, done something differently, went to a different location? Is there anything you would have done differently?
I think we're at the right place. I think Toronto Rehab was the right place to be. I think the outpatient rehab was the right place to be. I think that I was in a lot worse situation than what most people are. We were in inpatient rehab. A lot of people came in and left while I was still in a wheelchair. So that was kind of frustrating.
How long were you there?
10 weeks.
10 weeks. And what's the average length of stay for just a traditional?
4 to 6.
Is that different in the U.S. than it is in Canada, Henry?
Yeah, yeah. You're going to get the rare, it's not too much different, but you're going to get the rare incident like Guy's where it's going to require more intense involvement. But for the most part, it's going to be a shorter stay. And then that's during that, of course, very critical subacute stage, right, Guy? Where not, you mentioned leg, your goal was walking, but it's also to get your arm going. Whether you have other issues such as neglect, balance, vision, the brain is eager to get going again as the healing process starts and the swelling goes down, and now your neurons are trying to communicate with other neurons and rewire. So that's where it all starts. And so, I'm looking at a beautiful home that you're in right there, and I'm sure you've learned to be independent very easily with one-handed techniques for some of the things. And for others, you've made great strides where you don't need assistance. It's a lifelong process for many people. And the other question I had for you all regarding your home environment is, are there any special tech devices or adaptive equipment or gadgets in your house, whether it's your kitchen, it's grooming, it's outdoors, that you think is like a must-have to make your life more independent that you've come across that might be worth sharing with others?
Well, the big thing for me was eating. When you sit down to eat, if you only got one hand or limited use of two hands, is that you can't cut your food. It's embarrassing. So I use a Nork and a rocker knife.
So the Nork is a knife
Knife fork
fork
combination.
combo?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not
And then
sharp
you have
enough
the
to
rocker
cut
knife.
your mouth, but it's sharp enough to cut a steak.
Yeah, I cut a steak,
Right.
whatever I want, and eat the salad with it. So we like it so much we sell it.
That's nice. That's nice. Now, again, keep in mind for many of the folks listening, yeah, you may need adaptive equipment for a while. You may need it for a long time. Some of you don't need it that long at all. But you still have to try to use the affected side as much as possible, whether it's physical reps, meaning physical attempts to engage that affected limb, or mental reps, such as mental practice, just trying to imagine moving that affected limb, because when you imagine moving that affected limb, the same neurons fire as if you were moving the affected limb. So for some people, they may say to themselves, buying the adaptive one-handed equipment potentially means that they're giving up or they've failed. But for others, it is just another run in the ladder of recovery. So why make it's like golf? Golf is very difficult already. Let's not make it more difficult by buying clubs that are a little bit more challenging or trying to modify your swing. Stroke recovery is the same way. It's difficult, it's challenging. Don't make it more challenging. So you want to be independent. It feels good being independent, so you don't have to ask Jane to help you with as many things as she may need to. But at the same time, you're not waving the white flag saying your recovery is over. So people need to find that nice, healthy balance between using adaptive equipment to get by, even though it requires mostly one-handed techniques, but not giving up on the affected side and still fighting through to show more recovery, right?
I don't think the journey ever ends. I think it will be for me. I think it'll be it's just one thing, then you get to the next thing, get to the next thing. Like I want to go hunting again, hunting for geese. So I had to swing a shotgun. So I've got to practice to get my arm back for that. I'm hoping within the next year or two.
Rumor has it you're pretty good at hunting back in the day, and I've seen some photos to prove that, right?
Yeah, I grew up hunting and fishing, so we're trying to get back into that as best I can. But it's a new normal. Everything is a little different. Some things that would take me 3 minutes before to do, now it takes me 30. So you just gotta. I've been very, very careful. I watch around, see my environment, see what's around, mats, furniture, whatever's around, and I navigate around that very carefully.
You become aware of that.
Yes.
Because at the beginning you were
Oh,
not.
in the beginning, I smashed everything.
Yeah, a bull in a china shop.
Same thing.
You were the Tasman. I got the visual of the Tasmanian devil zipping through each room, right?
Oh yeah, Jane would walk through. We would be going around, and Jane would be walking in front of me and kind of pushing people out of the way when I was walking through.
Well, people would bang, like if he didn't have balance at all. So if they just tapped him on the shoulder, like, do you know how when you're walking in a crowded and you might rub up against something, he would fall. I didn't want him to fall, so I was constantly on alert. Watch out, don't hit him. Like
She should have played football.
That's right. That's right. So one final question I have for you is thinking about your recovery, and we're talking leg, we're talking balance, we're talking vision, we're talking arm and hand. To set the expectations, because I know you've made nice progress since your stroke, and you're continuing to make nice progress. What should stroke survivors and family members anticipate? How many hours per day should they anticipate exercising and challenging their affected side? And I always preface this by saying, well, if you ever learned an instrument or if you ever learned a sport, did you really do it 3 times per week for 45 minutes? And if so, how good were you, right? So some people do not like to hear this answer, and I haven't heard this answer from you yet, so I'm curious to learn. And my other comment is, a lot of clients never went to the gym prior to the stroke. So are they really now going to be super motivated to do this on a daily basis for hours and hours and hours? So what say you guys? If you're talking to a new stroke survivor at the hospital and they're trying to figure out their outpatient home program, how many hours realistically should they be doing a day? And what kind of effort do they need to put in?
Well, when I first came out, I couldn't do a lot because I used to have a nap in the afternoon, and rest is very important as well. But right now, I probably do anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day, plus work, because everything is rehab, and you got to treat it that way. You try to do more today, what you done yesterday. I do a lot of electromuscle stimulation on all parts of my body.
You bring up a good point, Guy. What I like to tell clients is when they're sitting at a table, whether it's for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, they usually have their hand on their lap and they don't have their hand on the table. I force them each time to make sure they raise that arm and put it on the table. What were you doing before your stroke? Were you always putting your affected hand on the lap when you're eating? Of course not. So try to go and envision what you used to do. Every time they go into a room, I'll have the clients put a little list near the light switch or the door. When you walk into that room, you must do these 3 or 4 things repeatedly. Think about how many times you go into rooms. That's more opportunity to stimulate the affected side. So yeah, I would say you're about right. That's what I recommend our clients envision. 3 to 6 hours for sure. Obviously, endurance and fatigue and sleep are very important, and we have to factor that in. Plus, some of our stroke survivors are working moms. So they can't do that. So maybe it's a weekend program or a nighttime program. So it's going to fluctuate.
Yeah, Henry, do you want to describe is there 7 stages to stroke recovery?
Yeah, well, the Brunnstrom stages,
Correct. I think, as you indicated earlier in the program, if someone would have been able to sit down with Jane and Guy and kind of explain this to them, right? And again, it's different for every stroke survivor. I'm not saying that it's a template, but the stages are pretty consistent, and how long it takes people to get from one stage to the next is important. But it all has to do with the reps, right, Guy? I mean, if you don't have the ability to put in the time or the dedication, it's just longer in each stage. You want to walk that through, Henry, and just give everybody an understanding what that looks like?
yeah. So Brunnstrom was a wonderful Swedish physio who created stages, recognized stages of stroke recovery. And these stages go from literally first stage being completely flaccid or limp or no movement at all. And Guy, you've probably went through that stage the first few days post-stroke as you're in the acute stage and you're just lying in the bed and you realize I can't move my arm. You know, people get that confused with strength. It's a central nervous system interrupter. It's when you have a stroke, it's just the communication's gone. It's not like if Arnold Schwarzenegger had a stroke right now, his muscle mass is still very, very strong. The connection's gone. It's not like he became weak, right? So when you have a stroke, you become flaccid, and that means the connection's not there and you can't move, and your arm's floppy. Some people are stuck in that stage, and ideally you don't want to be stuck in the flaccid stage because you can't move your limb at all. And sadly, some clients that are stuck in the flaccid stage, that stage one, those are the ones where you hear stories where they're like, I wish my doctor would amputate my arm so I can get a prosthetic because it'd be more functional at that point. So as they go from that flaccid stage, Pete, they transition into getting some movement, which then transitions to spasticity. And now they have full spasticity where they can't move and break out of what they call synergy, where you can isolate movements. So no matter what movement you do, you get into this synergistic position that is called, that is that spastic stage. And some people are stuck in the spastic stage and they can't break out of that spastic stage where they can do movements that will allow you to reach forward, extend your elbow, elevate your shoulder. That's a hard movement for stroke survivors to do. Shoulder flexion and elbow extension. When you're in that synergistic stage, when you go to raise your shoulder, your elbow locks in into flexion. So when folks can finally break through and activate the triceps to extend the elbow as they flex their shoulder or start extending their digits, they're then transitioning to that next stage. And that next and final stages of Brunnstrom go from breaking out of that synergy to now getting more normal movement where they have finger extension, they have elbow extension, maybe they can put their hand behind their head. So clients do not get educated a lot of times on those Brunnstrom stages, for example, and say, hey, Guy, this is where you are right now. Our goal is to go from stage 3, which is nothing but synergy and spasticity, to stage 4, which is going to start to break out and reduce that spasticity. And then here's what we want to do to accomplish transitioning from stage 3 to stage 4. Sometimes that works great. Sometimes we get stuck. And that's the mystery behind neuroscience. So yeah, Pete, those stages are very important to educate, and those stages are important for stroke survivors to understand and identify so they know what level they're at and where they're going, and also realizing that they're going to have many plateaus. Now, our tagline is "No Plateau in Sight," and this is the No Plateau podcast because ultimately, our goal is not to plateau permanently, but you will have many, many plateaus, just like we do all the time, and Guy did even prior to his stroke. So plateaus will exist, but we'll break through those plateaus with the proper treatment.
Well, the biggest thing that I find is that when I start to find myself plateauing or I seem like I'm not doing anything, I change it up. I was walking around the block the other day and this lady come off the step and ran towards me and said, I cannot believe how much you've improved in the last year. And I said, I thought I'd stopped. And she said, no. And the thing is that you will be the last one to see progress. That's the big thing I've learned.
That's a great point. And So let's talk quickly about how we help people who may not see the small moments of progress get through that. Guy, I believe you kind of write down your goals for the day or the week, and sometimes the progress of the accomplishment is just checking them off, correct?
Check them off. I do a checklist. When I started first, now I have it in my head. Before I couldn't remember. I had a checklist on the fridge. I would check it off physically every time I did it. So at the end of the day, you go back and look and see you've accomplished something. Because when I first came out, I really couldn't remember.
Yeah, that's right. So just those small accomplishments lead to the small improvements, which lead to big improvements as well. Guy, when you say you mix it up, give us an example of what you would do to kind of mix up your routine.
Well, I've got basically every piece of equipment I can find. Even from Wii, I have a Sable Flex that I use. I have the Sable Stretch that I use. I have Wii system, gaming system, which teaches me hand-eye coordination, balance. I have a balance fit, Wii Fit with the balance board, which basically shows you on the TV where your body balance is and where your weight is being distributed. And that is a fantastic tool.
And depending on the game, it requires you to shift. So if you're jumping, like the ski jumping, it's requiring you to shift your weight forward and then backwards. And otherwise, on the screen, you fall, right? So his goal is not to fall on the screen, which in life brings him more balance and gives him more awareness of weight shifting to do different things.
Excellent.
By the way, there are games I'm not allowed to play. I came in a couple games. I was coming a couple games, and we were looking over a cliff, and she had to catch me.
So you're not playing that game anymore.
That's off the list.
Yeah, we're going to definitely eliminate the Oculus Rift then, because that's a little too immersive for you, Guy.
But every season is basically a different set of exercises. There's the go-tos every day. I have to do the same exercises every day. There's a certain group I do. But during the season, what I'll do is I can't walk outdoors in the wintertime. I'll get a recumbent bike that I purchased. I get on that for half an hour a day, 45 minutes a day. I do range of motion all the time. In the morning on my lower body, and in the evening before bed I do it on my upper body.
So you're covering all aspects of your care, which is wonderful. And I'm wearing a shirt here that says repetition is key. If you had to, as we wrap up this interview, if you had to, I would hate to say the word guess because maybe you're even keeping track of it. How many repetitions do you think you do on a daily basis?
It's gone beyond. It's I don't know. It's just a set I go through every day, and I don't do count. I used to count before. I don't count anymore. I just do it till I can't do it anymore.
When you were counting, were we talking hundreds or thousands?
Oh, probably doing sets of 10, 15, 3 or 4 times a day like that. Like doing squats and stuff, but I've got a routine from doing standing on a wedge in my bedroom to doing a recumbent bike to doing squats, doing heel raises, tiptoes to walking 5K a day.
Yeah, well, walking's definitely its own little opportunity for repetition, but when you're doing specific drills and exercises at home in your living room, whether it's the games, the Wii, it's the squats, shoulder movements, whatever it is, or your mental practice, or it's mirror box, you definitely want to at least get, and this is more for the audience, because I know you've been doing a good job of this, you definitely want to get at least 300 to 400 repetitions of task-specific movements per day. Anything below that, the research shows that it's not as effective when it comes to driving neuroplastic changes. So really shoot for that 300 to 400 reps per day.
Yeah, and a good point there, Henry. It's the amount of time guys put in 4 to 6 hours a day, and you're getting in thousands of reps every day easily. And then especially now that you're up to the walking, there's an interesting point there that goes across not only stroke recovery, but anybody who's trying to get in shape or lose weight. The fact that you're now pushing yourself to failure, right, till you can't do anymore, Guy. Yeah. There's such an important lesson there because that's when neuroplasticity happens, right? That's when your body goes up to the point where it was before. Your muscles, your brain get tired, and they remember that point now. So the next time you can go a little farther, and that's how you build those neurons connecting again, muscles getting a little stronger, building back up. That concept, by the way, that's difficult. Not a lot of people are willing to do that every day. And I'm sure Jane's next to you cheering you on, or maybe suggesting you can go a little bit farther every time.
Are you stopping already?
That's what I was looking for. Jane and Guy, thank you so much for sharing. And I think we kind of glanced over, but I want to rehash for everybody that both strokes you had, I mean, they were life-threatening, incredibly serious strokes.
Yeah, I mean, the first one I had was bad. It was a blockage. The second one I had was a brain bleed. I was in a coma for 4 to 6 weeks following that one.
Every day you spend in a hospital, people consider to take a week to physically recover. So just do the math there, folks. It was a big lift. And Jane, again, I think half the story here is the fact that Guy was in shape before this happened, but the real big part is the role you've played in his recovery by being there and being curious, learning, and being a constant cheerleader. So I hope everyone listening has a way to find another Jane in their life as well. So, Henry, thanks for your time. Carly, thanks for setting this up. And this is another, I think, inspiring and educational episode of the No Plateau podcast. Until we see you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Guy. Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in to the No Plateau podcast. Please make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on more stroke and brain injury recovery stories. The No Plateau podcast is intended to give you an insight into stroke and brain injury survivors' journeys. Any opinions given on this podcast are strictly the individual's, and we do not suggest that you necessarily hold the same viewpoints as anyone on this podcast. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Reliance on any information provided by the No Plateau podcast is solely at your own risk.